This episode is brought to you by Yinchi, the new game from Spielworks. Pre-order it now at spielworks.de. Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week is a lesson in selflessness. Starting off as a cruise ship pianist and live music agent, his desire to help those in need led him to Uganda. Here he founded the Butterfly Project, a charity focused on improving lives of the children in the country. He went on to start Uganda's first board game convention in Gulu, and last year started Game Changers, an organisation that uses board games not only to improve lives, but to identify children that could be sponsored to become social entrepreneurs. My guest this week is Ben Parkinson. Ben, welcome to the cabin.
Thanks very much. Pleased to be here.
So, to begin, it's the question I usually ask people. How difficult was it for you to choose the 5 games to take with you?
Pretty difficult. I played a lot of games this year, or at least I've watched a lot of people playing different games this year, and I've learned quite a lot. But I've settled on 5, which I'm happy with, which are kind of the games over the years that I've played since I was quite young up until now. Some have stayed the test of time.
I mean, do you have a personal collection, or are all of your games the organisation's games? And is gaming part of your job, essentially?
I guess it is part of the job, although obviously it's not all of the job. I don't really have my own collection anymore. They've all been subsumed within the larger collection that we've spread around Uganda up to the villages and to the clubs in the different cities that we're working in.
And so that implies then, I guess, you don't see... You're not a collector. You're not someone for whom the object itself is important and valuable.
Definitely not. In fact, I like to try lots and lots and lots of different new things and really enjoy playing new games. But there are some which I also love to come back to, and these are the ones that I've chosen.
And so, I mean, how do you get games there? I assume there isn't a friendly local game shop you pop down to, and I assume the Amazon delivery isn't wonderful.
I've never tried Amazon, but you can buy some board games. They have pirate copies on the streets sometimes of the most common games like Monopoly and I'm trying to think of another one, Scrabble. But in the shops you can buy other board games, the real proper versions of them, but none of them are the most interesting and most useful games. And I feel that games like Scrabble aren't really very suitable either.
What's the lack of suitability?
It's really that while Scrabble is a good game, it's really very hard for someone who doesn't have English as their first language. And while English is spoken a lot in Uganda, you can't really win unless you've got a very wide vocabulary. And in Uganda, the schools have a very narrow vocabulary that they work with. And therefore, Scrabble is somewhere down the track, whereas for us in the UK, it might be one of the first games that you teach it. For me, Scrabble would be one of the later games that you include. It's not really a gateway game.
And what is the primary language in Uganda?
It depends where you are, of course, because it's split into a lot of different areas. Northern Uganda has its own language, which is Acholi. The main language for the south is Luganda. And I guess those would be the two most common languages, although there are others as well.
Is there a lingua franca there, a state language that's used?
It is meant to be English, but clearly that's really restricted to the city areas, and local languages are much more prominent in the rural areas, and Uganda is mainly rural.
And how is your command of the languages there? Can you speak them at all?
This is a bit of a standing joke, really. I'm not very good at all, but I do know some words in all of the different languages. But no, I'm not. My focus has always been on trying to teach English in our project and helping them improve their English. So I've not been very good at learning.
I mean, I've taught English for many years, and I taught English to German speakers and also to non-German speakers. And I always find I fell into a trap when teaching German speakers that we could descend very quickly into almost speaking German with each other because I would understand. Is it an advantage to improve someone's English to not know their language so you're compelled to communicate in the language you're teaching?
I think it's probably a balance is better. And, my focus on English is helpful for them, and they have said to me that it's really important that they expand their vocabulary. So yeah, I'm just sticking with the way that I've been doing up to now. But our project's very experimental. That's in some ways why we are one of the few organizations using board games. And so we're breaking new ground in a lot of different ways, and we're always open to suggestions how we might improve what we are working and how we are working.
So I want to, as much as you can, sort of fill in listeners on Uganda, because it is shameful that in the West we have a sort of a generalized opinion of Africa and what Africa is, and our level of detail is usually, painfully embarrassing, and I absolutely include myself in this. Can you give us a rundown of the country of Uganda? What are its characteristics? What's the state of its government? What's the state of its economy? Those sorts of things.
Well, I think the first thing that strikes you in Uganda is that people are generally very friendly, and they're very used to people from other countries, not just Western countries, but from other countries in East Africa, and they're very welcoming to refugees, for instance, and understand maybe the issues that refugees have too.
Where is Uganda geographically? Which countries does it border?
It borders southern Sudan, Congo to the west, Rwanda to the south. East would be Kenya, and Tanzania was also there too. And
how is the government made up? Is it a democratically elected government there?
The government in Uganda has been there for, I think it's around 30 years now. And so it's very much embedded in Uganda. It doesn't look like it's likely to change in the near future. So the same party has been ruling throughout this particular period of time, and the same president. So yes, it's democratically elected, and that's been something that's, I think it's every 5 or 6 years that they have an election, and the president has won each time over the last 5 or 6 elections that have taken place.
And what faith do you have that it is democratic, that the president is there reflecting the will of the people? Or is it just, because I live in Germany, and in East Germany, there were democratic elections every 4 years, and the Communist Party won them every time. And it was clearly a sham. Is this the case there?
I tend not to get into politics very much in Uganda. I don't think it's my place really to get involved with that side of things. I think it would be fair to say, though, that the percentage of the vote in the last election was higher than it perhaps should have been, and didn't necessarily reflect the number of people that voted.
And so, in what ways do you think Uganda reflects Africa? In which ways is there, you can say general things about Uganda in relation to Africa, and in what ways is Uganda unique?
Okay, well, I've visited a few countries. In Africa, I visited Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, and comparing those four countries, I think I mentioned Uganda is definitely the country where people are the most friendly, a little set in their ways, maybe, and whereas in other countries where things are a bit more dynamic, perhaps in Nigeria, it's lots of exciting things are happening, although not all good things. But in Uganda, things have tended to stay the way they are, and in particular in the villages. I think it'd be fair to say that the villages are very similar to what they were 50, 100 years ago. Although Kampala itself has really developed over the last 10 years since I've been there. The other parts of Uganda have not really changed very much during the same period of time, in my opinion, although I've not travelled in every part of Uganda.
If I were to travel to Kampala, to Uganda, for the first time, what would be my experience, do you think? What would strike me as sort of uniquely Ugandan?
I think if you go to Kampala, the first thing that strikes you, it's not obviously unique, but the level of poverty strikes you almost immediately when you come from the airport. From the airport into Kampala itself, it's about an hour's drive, and you'll see slum areas to the left and to the right as you drive straight into the city. The city is, it's like I say, it's quite an interesting city now, whereas perhaps 8 to 10 years ago there was very little there. So it's had quite a lot of very interesting things that have been brought in, but it's still not really a destination where there are lots of things to do. Uganda is a great country for safari, and the game parks are really very excellent in Uganda, but Kampala has quite a lot more things that could be there to attract tourists, and I'd like to see that develop over the next 5 to 10 years so that it became a country where more people came to visit, and because there were lots of very interesting things in the city to do, as well as just going out to the safari parks that are there.
And how safe would I feel? How dangerous is this, or is this an impertinent question?
No, I think of all the countries that I've visited in Africa, Uganda has been the one where I've felt the most safe. Certainly ahead of Kenya, ahead of Tanzania, a long way ahead of Nigeria, which I didn't feel very safe in at all. So I think if people did want to come, or perhaps they wanted to come to our convention, they would certainly be safe.
If I go to Uganda and I want to eat something specifically Ugandan, what do I eat?
Well, they have a dish which is, I guess it's the national dish. It's called Luwombo, and that's like a chicken dish, where the chicken is boiled with different vegetables, and it's very nice. The thing that I perhaps like the most, which again probably not uniquely Ugandan, but it's what they call G-nut sauce, and that's used with vegetables to add flavour, and really again it's very nice. So maybe the G-nut sauce would be the thing that I would like the best.
So I want to move on to your first game then. And this is a game I must confess I'd never heard of. And then I did the research on BGG, and this is an old game, and it seems to be a game that's quite well loved. And this is Careers. Is this the first game you played, do you think?
No, definitely not. It was one that came in maybe 2 or 3 years after I started. I used to play I think probably the first game I played, apart from card games, was Scrabble. I used to play that with my grandparents after school.
And were you any good at it? Because I'm absolutely horrendous. I just don't know the 2-letter words that score you 1,000,000 points.
I think for my age, I was very good at the time, and I certainly used to have a very good memory for words when at school, and so I developed quite a good vocabulary. And thus did well at Scrabble. I didn't know what the words meant at the time, but that's what Scrabble is, really. You need to know the words. You don't need to know what they mean.
And so why careers then, and not Scrabble?
I mean, I kind of like to play Scrabble, but it's quite a competitive game, and the reason I liked careers is that you kind of have fun when you're playing it. You don't really mind whether you win or lose. It's the experience of playing careers and deciding which career that you're going through, and deciding, actually this game I'm not going to play it the same way as I did last time. I'm going to start by going into ecology, or I'm going to do everything to get into the space program this time, or next game I'm not going to bother with any fame. I'm just going to go for happiness and money, and so every time you play the game you can kind of change what it is. You change all the goalposts completely, and you set up what your target is, even right at the beginning of the game. And to me that's really good, because it means that you yourself decide right at the beginning of the game what your game is going to be like, and you can change it every time you play.
And so, do you think this game's given anything to the modern world of board gaming? Because I was surprised. The first thing it says when you look on the BGG page is Careers is a game in which you choose your own victory conditions. And that seems quite a modern concept.
Yeah, definitely. And essentially you have 60 points, and you can spend whatever combination you like amongst 3 different things, whether it be money, whether it be fame, or whether it be happiness. And I think that's really good. At something which maybe other games have taken over the years. I can't think of an immediate game which has done that, but yes, that's definitely a modern thing. It understands that you want to play the game differently each time you play, and therefore it's had a longevity from when I was playing it when I was perhaps 10 or 11, right up until now, 40 odd years later. So,
and so, do you still play this game?
Yeah, I definitely do play it. Maybe a couple of times each year. But I've not even taken this one to Uganda because it's kind of a precious game, which is here from. It's something that I've had from my childhood, so it's almost like an important treasure. It's one of the few that I've kept in my collection, if you like, which has not gone to Uganda.
So I want to go back to the beginning. So Careers was one of your first games. And you said in your bio that you sent me that you sort of were aware of games, but you never had anyone to play them with. What kept you interested in games when you weren't playing them?
Well, I read, and I was able to play. I've always been part of a small family, and therefore it had been tending to be 2-player games at best. I can remember I had some 3-player games which never ever got played, and which were minimum 3 players, and they never were played. And so yes, what kept me interested? Well, I like to read, and I read the magazine Games and Puzzles, which I think became something else later. And I used to really enjoy reading about the games and how they played, and got enthusiastic about them through the reading. And a bit later on, I found some friends who were interested, and we used to play a little bit more, but never very much. Yeah, never very much.
It seems that a lot of the games you listed in your bio were sort of war games. Were they the only sort of serious games that were around at the time?
It did seem that way to me. I mean, until I discovered Games Workshop, it seemed like most of the games were Avalon Hill war games, and or SPI. And so I picked up a few of those, but really they were very complicated, and it seemed to me a little overcomplicated for the enthusiasm that I had to play them. So I didn't really play very many many war games at all. They don't really suit me very much, I don't think.
And what were the GW games that attracted you?
Now you're asking. I can remember a game called Warlock that we used to play, which was about two wizards fighting against each other, which I think we found really quite fun. And there's another game called Kings and Things, which I think we played. Those more fantasy orientated games, those were the ones which attracted me and got me more interested over time.
And so then you went on to university to study music in Bristol. What drew you to the study of music then? Did you come from a musical family?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I started playing piano when I was 3 years old, and I went to the Royal College of Music at junior department, and I learned how to play piano, and I also played trombone. I played in orchestras and did composition with some good people, Oliver Nassen, so very much it's an area which probably is my main specialist area. It's the area I know the most about and was the most qualified to go to university for. Though I was more interested in languages at the time. But I wasn't able to get my course in languages, so I went to Bristol and did music there.
And what is the study of music? What do you do there?
Well, it was a lot of it is about history, it's about analysis. We did acoustics. We also worked on our own musical projects, and I did orchestration and composition and so it's quite a lot of areas that were there. It was quite a traditional course at Bristol. They had an area, a whole department on early music, which I have to say didn't really interest me. But I was very interested in orchestral music, so I wrote some compositions and orchestrations of music while I was there.
And did they show disdain for popular music? Was it very much orchestral, classical, serious, highbrow art?
I think that's what the university was really most interested in. But there were certainly quite a few people on the course who did more modern music. And I know there were certainly a few who were working professionally in that area who were on our course as well. But the university itself, like I say, was quite traditional in its thinking. And at the time, which was obviously a long time ago, and yes, most of the training that was given there was geared towards classical music.
So you studied music, so you've obviously thought about music. What do you think music can give us that other forms of art can't? Why is music so important to us as an animal?
Well, I think for me, maybe I don't reflect the most people, but I find music and music harmony very interesting, very stimulating. And the whole kind of necessarily the study of music, or the analysis of music, but by listening to more different types of music, you gain knowledge of music and you start to experience it in different ways. So classical music has a lot to offer because it covers a lot of harmonic ground. So that means that when people are listening to it, that sometimes they might not understand it, but over time they will get to grips with it and they will learn it. It's almost like a board game, if you like. Some of the harder board games are a little bit inaccessible at the start, but as you start to play more board games or you listen to more different types of music and get more aware of the different types, you start to enjoy slightly more complicated music, and that's really where I'm coming from.
Is it a cerebral enjoyment? Is it a visceral enjoyment?
I think so. Certainly for me, and also for me as a at least at some part of my life as a career musician, it was helpful to be listening to these other types of harmonies, different types of chords, different styles of playing music and rhythms, because you can then put that into your own style and develop something a bit different. So when people listen to you play, they like and enjoy the things that you are playing.
For a heathen like me, and I'm sure a very small percentage of the people listening to this, what would you recommend a good gateway piece of music to enter us into that deep world that you inhabit?
Well, maybe there were two people that were recommended to me when I was younger, and I will give the same recommendation. And they have some similarities to each other, but they are different styles of music. The first one is Delius, and Delius is a British composer who lived in the early 1900s. But his style of music is very listenable, and the harmonies of Delius are really quite exciting. And without being, hammering at you or telling you you've got to be listening to it, you can just listen to it and get used to the new types of harmonies. The other recommendation for me is a guy called Bill Evans, and he's a pianist and a jazz pianist, and he used to play with Miles Davis, who you may have heard of. But his style of piano playing has really impacted on so many piano players ever since. And again, you're not being punched in the face by his particular style. You're able to listen to it, and you might say, oh, this isn't very interesting. He's not doing anything flashy. But if you listen more and more, you start to understand how his playing is very different from everyone else's, and how if you were a piano player, you could let that influence your own particular style.
So I want to move on then to your next game, which is a new addition to the list. You knocked off one of your old favourites. Seems quite brutal to me, but there we are. This is Folklore: The Affliction. Why are you taking this one with you?
Okay, well, I looked through my list and I thought, well, actually, role-playing has been something which I've really enjoyed over the years, fantasy role-playing, and I didn't have a game which was anything like that amongst the list that I have, hopefully not betraying some of my later games on my list. But Folklore: The Affliction was a game that we acquired this year, and it just... For me, it was a very exciting game. I love the fantasy stories that you can put into there. I love the fact that the game tells you that you don't have to, if you get into a situation in the game where there's no rule, you can make up your own rule, which is what you do in role-playing. And in terms of replayability, I like this game because you can play the adventures again and again, but with different classes or different combinations of classes. And I've never had any problem with that. I love kind of taking something and using the strengths and weaknesses of a new class to do the same thing and achieve the same result a different way. That's, I think, something which this game does really well. And I guess this particular game, it's got lots of unique aspects to it, which other games haven't had. So for instance, things like you've got the classes there, but you're using those classes in a role-playing sense to play through an adventure. And I don't think that other games have done this in the same way. I've played things like Descent, but that is much less of a role-playing experience than Folklore: The Affliction. So yeah, that's why I like that. And I like that kind of, well, actually, if you want to, you can just sit back and role-play the situation if you want to. If you've got a group of players who are interested in doing that, you can do that as well.
And so this game, I've not played it, but I know of it. And this is a game that plays with our preconceptions of sort of foundational stories in Western society. How is it playing it with people whose cultural touchstones are so different? What is their reaction to these traditional sort of European ideas?
They like, I think, is the answer to that. The game, this particular game, is a little complicated for most of the young people that I work with in Uganda, but over time more will get into it. But there has been a group of 5 or 6 that we played this particular game with, and those ones are really very familiar with all the folklore of all of countries in Europe or around the world. Because they've got the experience of playing, or they've seen a lot of films or whatever. So it's not been a problem for them. They love seeing things like Lord of the Rings. I know Patrick is one of the children who's grown up with us, and the things he says is that I need to show films like Lord of the Rings to the children in the villages, otherwise they won't know what it's about. They won't understand it at all, and they won't actually engage with it unless they've got an idea. And that's one of the reasons with the convention that he suggested this year that we should be doing a live action role playing, so that the children themselves could experience what it was that was in the game in practical terms before they actually played it. And that's the reason we put in the LARP this year.
And do you think the folk tales of Uganda, are they similar to the folk tales of Europe? Are the same themes apparent?
I think some of the themes definitely are trying to cover the same ground in terms of informing children how they should behave and how they should live their lives. They're very much the ones that I've seen, and again, I'm no expert, the ones that I've seen tend to be focused around animals and animals that are doing specific things like humans might do. So yes, they in some ways they might replace the monsters that we might have in European folklore.
So I want to move on then to talk about your charity work. So you had some years in the wilderness doing marketing, and then you started doing social enterprise work in Birmingham. So what was that, and how did that come about?
It's an organisation that worked with long-term unemployed. I mean, in some ways, when I was running the music agency beforehand, I was running unwittingly a social enterprise, because I was there trying to help the development of live music. That was my main reason for starting that particular business. But
I can tell you, as an artist myself, anyone who helps artists earn any money whatsoever is an absolute saint.
Well, at the time, I just had an idea, and I moved and put that into practice, and to some extent, it worked. And I got a taste for social enterprise. So the next organization that I worked for worked with long-term unemployed, and the idea was to train them up so that they could become workers that could get jobs. So for instance, they might have been out of work for 10 or 15 years. They would come and work for us in something called an intermediate labor market. And during the 6 months that they were with us, sometimes less, they learned work skills, and in many cases were able to find themselves jobs after having worked for us. So we had people there. We weren't there to train them for our own benefit. We were there to train them for the benefit of, for their benefit and for the benefit of the UK, because then they would become more skilled workers than when they first came to us.
Is it as much about routine, about getting out of the house, about lifting the sort of stink of long-term unemployment off, as much as learning skills?
Yeah. It's getting into a routine, definitely. That's quite important, and so we always made sure that they had to be in on time at 9 a.m. And they were penalised if they didn't manage to do that, because it's part of their training. But obviously everyone is different, and you had to adapt the kind of services that you were giving depending on the people who were there. Some of them were, let's say, they were highly qualified, yet they'd been out of work for 20 years because something terrible had happened to them. There were some who were completely unqualified but very intelligent. And so you were kind of trying to find out what it was that they were good at, and then find some additional, maybe even some specific training which would get them a qualification, which would get them into a job, because you knew that they were capable. There were some who were recovering addicts, who, had extra issues that you had to deal with them. People from all walks of society. But the key thing with us, we had our core program, but we were able to deal with the unique aspects of each individual person.
And so what made you decide then to move from sunny Birmingham and go and work in Africa?
Okay, well, I did quite a lot of fundraising for the organisation I was working with, and I realised that we were able to raise maybe £500,000, £1 million for our work. And I just thought to myself one day, well, if I was able to do the same thing for Africa, then I would be able to achieve a lot more with that money than I am here in the UK, because UK needs things to be done in a certain way, which are very costly. People expect very high salaries for working in these kinds of fields. When I say very high, I say very high comparatively to those people living in Uganda or other countries in Africa. And so I felt that if I were able to do that, then we could achieve more, actually achieve more social impact. But I knew nothing about Africa, and so I went to visit. And that's when I went to Nigeria.
So for this week's look at Yinchi, I went straight to the source, the man himself, Uli Blenneman, and he's going to tell us why he chose Yinchi to be published by Spielworks.
Yeah, when I first saw the game, I saw that first, of course, the theme is interesting to me. a game set in the late Ming Dynasty. There aren't that many games in this period. And what I found immediately interesting is that the Yangtze River had a very high importance in the game. So, and the game is very variable because you are acting as a farmer in a way on the fields, but you are moving these goods that you produce on the fields to the markets, local ones and the urban markets. Then you produce in early factories some real goods out of this stuff, these raw materials, and finally you have to deliver these goods from the factories to the coast where ships are already waiting. So there's a lot going on, but in a very elegant way. I think it's very much a Spielworks game because it's definitely not your standard fare. First, it's a complex game, and the playing time for your first game is definitely 2 hours plus, so it's not a casual game. But in my opinion, it's a great gaming experience. I think the most innovative thing is how the game uses actions. You are having 6 actions a turn, and you are getting 3 cards a turn. And with these 3 cards, you are doing exactly 6 actions, 3 fortune actions and 3 worker actions. But how you do these actions, in which order, that is really most interesting. And these 6 actions are connected to 10 different possible actions. So in a full turn, you cannot do all possible actions anyway. And again, how you sequence your actions, this is most interesting in my opinion.
So you can still pre-order Yinchi at spielworks.de. And so Nigeria was your initial plan, and then that didn't work out. How did you end up? So what happened in Nigeria, and how did you end up in Uganda?
Well, I went to Nigeria just really on a exploratory research mission to see what it is that I might be able to achieve. And
what did you want to achieve? What were your initial aspirations?
Well, I wasn't sure. I just knew that I had certain skills, and that because I wanted to really have an open mind as to how best I could use those skills in Africa. I went to visit an Ashoka Fellow in Nigeria, and we visited villages and some towns in northern Nigeria, and that's when it sort of became clear that that the children in these villages are not what I expected, at least not what I expected at the time. I realized that they had aspirations. I realized that they were looking at others around the world, or when they were aware of the other children around the world, they felt that they also deserved that same chance. And on one occasion, one came to me and says, "Can I help him? Because he wants to create change in his village, but he doesn't know how to do it. Could I train him?" So I thought, well, okay, I don't know much about African villages. I don't know very much about this, but at least I know how to research things, and I do know how to train. And so that's really how the whole concept of the Butterfly Project came about, through this young man who was about 14 or 15 in this village. And so yeah, we moved on the project from there.
And so why Uganda? Why not Nigeria?
Okay, why not Nigeria? Okay, well, Nigeria is not very easy to work in independently, and this is why, to some extent, I say Uganda is much better for an overseas person to come to. It's quite a lot easier to set up a project in Uganda than it is in Nigeria. We had a sponsor in Nigeria, a politician, but unfortunately he died just at about the time we were about to start the project. And because we were reliant on his sponsorship financially, and also he gave us a building to operate our project from, and he said he was going to finance it ongoing. Plus, he was also a sponsor to get me a work visa. All of those things became really very difficult when he died. So yeah, we had to rethink how we're going to move it forward. By then I'd actually established some other contacts in Uganda, so I discussed it with Emmanuel in Nigeria, and I said to him, I'm going to try to set up this thing that we talked about in Uganda, and that's about a year later I was able to set it up in Uganda.
And you said you set up the project. Did you finance it yourself?
What I decided to do was that we would try out the idea for 1 year, and I was able to finance it for 1 year, and so that's what I did. I financed year one, and thereafter I said, well, if it works, then we will try to get funding to continue it. If it doesn't work, then I will have said, well, I've tried and not succeeded. But after the first year, all of the members of the project, they weren't ready to finish.
And so this became the Butterfly Project then? And so what is it that the Butterfly Project actually does?
Well, I guess it's not as straightforward as perhaps it might seem. As far as the Butterfly Project itself is concerned, we recruit children from villages, and we also recruit from slum areas, or at least we have historically. And we recruit those children who seem, from our interviews and from our testing, to want to be change makers, who want to be social entrepreneurs, who've got ideas for creating change in their society. And then we choose a number of them, because obviously we can't afford to train everyone. We choose a number of them that we think will be the most successful, and we put them on a training program. And that training program includes computing, and a whole lot of other areas. For instance, we focus on world citizenship. We work on how they can develop their vision for the future. We help them identify their own talent and then help nurture that talent so they become better at whatever it is they're good at. We teach them project management skills in practical terms, because we ask them to set up their own project, their own social project, and put it into practice and develop it over the course of the training. We give them new practical skills like cooking, carpentry, painting and decorating, these kinds of things. If they want to do that, we include that as part of our training. But we also do creative things like music, art, dance, drama. All of those are also part of our program too. Because most of the children that we work with, and most of them start around 12, 13 age, they have done music, they have done a bit of art, and they've done some dance and drama. So they know whether they're good at those already. So it's a good area for us to nurture their experience in those areas. But the other kind of key area that we work with them is ethics. And this is the area where they give us the best feedback, really. They say we wanted to be ethical human beings, but we weren't sure how to put this into practice, and quite a lot of the time we were being encouraged not to be ethical by our peers. So we enjoyed having a reinforcement.
When you say not ethical, what does that mean? What is that a euphemism for?
it could be a lot of things, but it's generally things like not telling the truth or trying to deceive or trying to steal things or be not transparent. It's all of the corruption that is in society and in every society around the world.
Are there drug problems there? Are there substance abuse, alcoholism, that sort of thing? And is that rife among kids there?
Alcoholism, there is a lot of alcohol problems, particularly in village areas, but also in the slum districts. So alcohol is a very major issue. Drugs is much less of an issue. And although there are certain drugs that people are using, but it's not like people are importing into Uganda the dangerous drugs as yet. So it's much less of a problem, but it's important for them to know right now about the dangers of harder drugs. But yeah, alcohol is a major issue, and particularly in the village areas, because adults, that is the main recreation that they will have, or most of the adults will have in the village areas, because there's nothing much more to do.
So I want to go on to your next game, and this is the first board game you played with the Butterfly Project, and this was Alhambra. So firstly, how did you come up with the idea to introduce games to the kids, and how did this thing, which I assume, I think about living in the West and most people don't know about hobby board games. So what was the reaction to this when you pulled it out?
I think, well, firstly, we've always been an experimental project. There's no other project which we were copying. We were trying to come up with some new way to educate the young people in Uganda. So the board games, I think I selected about 4 or 5 board games. I bought them and I took them thinking, let's try these out amongst our new group. And the feedback from them was pretty good. And Alhambra was the game which they always come back to and say, I remember playing Alhambra. We were really surprised at how fun it was. We enjoyed that particular part of the training. It was the very first session that we did. It was the last thing we did on the very first session for the butterfly training. And it's obviously been a part of their own memories as well. So clearly it's had its own impact, this particular game.
And was this the game that brought you back into gaming, or had you sort of stepped back in before this?
I think maybe I'd been doing a bit of role playing before I went out, and I'd started to establish a bit more of that kind of the gaming activity, particularly with role playing up to that point. But I still was enjoying board games, although I didn't play them very much. I still had a kind of penchant for board games, if you like, and enjoyed the social aspects of playing the board games, which I also enjoyed the role-playing games for. But Alhambra, did it bring me back in to board games? Well, this one, and I guess the other games which I took out, also.
Which were, do you remember?
I don't remember all of them, but I know that the next game on the list was also one of those games that I took out at the beginning. But yeah, Alhambra, I've always felt it's been a good game, and it's a good game to teach people who've never played a board game before, because it's just that little bit challenging, but it's very easy to get started. You don't need to be going through a plethora of rules before you're already, starting to build your Alhambra.
So I want to talk now about what you're probably most well known for within the gaming community. And this sort of, I saw photos that sort of popped up a couple of years ago, and it sort of spread around Board Game Geek and then Twitter. And this is the game convention in Gulu. What made you go from using board games in training to thinking, I'll hold a convention, the first convention in Africa?
Well, it wasn't my idea. That's the first thing. It was one of our third cohort who had the idea, Beckham, and he simply said to me, I fancy doing something up in Gulu this year. What can we do?
And Gulu is a rural northern community.
It's a fairly big town, maybe city, up in, towards the Sudan border. So to the north of, it's about 350 kilometers north of Kampala. So we discussed different things and the board games idea and so we decided that we would try bringing children together and see if people were interested in supporting this particular project. And it turned out that people were very, very pleased to support it. And that's how we were able to do quite a big event first time around.
And so when you say big, how many attendees?
The first one, I think we had 70 to 80 on the first day, and then that became 90, and on the third day we had 120 because word spread that we were running this new thing and children were walking for miles to get to the convention on the third day. So we did Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They on the Saturday they told us they didn't want to go home. They wanted to stay on longer, but we couldn't keep them any longer, unfortunately.
And so what happens at the convention? Can you explain the convention to us? Because most of the people listening to this will have been to a convention. In what ways is it similar to that notion of a European one, and in which ways is it sort of uniquely Gulu?
Okay, well, I think the first thing that it is the same in that we have lots and lots of tables and we have lots of games out on each table and we have people who know how to play the games teaching the games, and the children can come along and say that game looks fun, let me learn how to play this. So it's very much they can walk from wherever they want to another table afterwards, or if they don't like a game, I guess they can pull out and somebody else can step in. What makes it different, I suppose, is if you can imagine that most of the children, the village area where we operate from, we don't do it in Gulu. We do it about 12 kilometers from Gulu in our own center, which we built about 3 or 4 years ago. And they come from some distance away. So therefore, if they walk to our center, which some of them have done, it's not reasonable for them to go back home again and then come back the next day. They do sometimes. But so we've tried to incorporate our own kinds of residential there. So that means we're feeding them and we are supporting, we're giving them lunch and we're giving them evening meal. And I don't think if you went to Games Expo, they would give you your lunch and evening meal or anywhere to sleep for free. But that's what we are doing as part of the convention. That's where the money that people are paying, that most of it will go to that cost. But also the transport, if we wanted to come from further afield, then we'd need to finance them to come from those places. And because this year, I'm thinking about the second convention now. This year, some of our clubs were 150 kilometers away from our center near Gulu. Then we then had to finance them to come from their club to our center as well. So yeah, we are more kind of we take a view that it's an activity that we are running, and we need people to go to come to it. But on the very first one, we knew that people were excited by it because the numbers increased day by day. And like I said, on both the first and second conventions, the children that were there, mostly they were 10 to 16. They said afterwards that they didn't want to go home and could we continue for more days. But because of the costs of everything and the cost of the food and keeping them there, we couldn't continue it any longer.
And so what do you think the kids get from it? I mean, obviously they learn new games, obviously it's nice, but do you think they get something, do they get lessons that they can learn in life from not just playing the games, but the convention itself?
The convention, well, I think one of the things that particularly the children in the rural areas, is that there is almost nothing for them to do other than work on their farming in their school holiday period. And if no one comes up with an activity for them, then they will sit and they will do very little if they're given leisure time. You know, if they're sitting doing nothing, my guess is their parents will say, can you go out and do this on the farming? So it's really about expanding their horizons from thinking that they're going to be farmers or they're going to be doing this kind of work their whole lives. Once they get involved with board games and see all of the different aspects of life and learning these different concepts, and it's starting to really change the way they think about the world. So if you're bringing them out of the village to this kind of stimulating environment, it's really beneficial to them. And also in the convention, we also change their staple food as well a little bit, so that they're able to taste new foods as well as playing new games, because all of these things, they help, like I say, broaden their horizons and help them to feel more confident about trying new things.
So firstly, how do you pay for it? And secondly, how can we help?
Well, we decided to run a crowdfunder for the first convention, and we were very fortunate that two very well-known board game designers helped us market this particular project. Matt Leacock.
So that was Matt Leacock
and Tony Boydell. And those two marketed it for us, and therefore it spread. And we even got on the Shut Up and Sit Down website, and that also brought very many more people to that first to look at that first convention and support it. Subsequent to that, Matt and Tony have done the same thing for the second convention, and again we've been able to expand the project for the second year. We had probably around double the number of people on the second convention that we had on the first one. We even had to expand our building in order to accommodate the additional people at the convention. So yeah, the crowdfunder is what's done it for us. There's no way we could be financing this particular event without the crowdfunder support.
And when is the next one?
It's going to be in May again this year. That's our plan. Obviously, we will do the same, and we'll put a crowdfunder up probably towards the end of January, maybe early February, and hopefully people will be still prepared to support us again.
So your next game is a game that I assume one of these initial games that you took when you introduced games, and you said this is the one that kids really love, and this is Cheeky Monkey. Why do you think that the kids really love this one?
I think they like collecting things, firstly. That's definitely one thing. They like going out and collecting things, particularly the children in Kampala. many of them are used to going out and collecting stuff, either collecting bottles for resale or collecting scrap for resale. The whole aspect of collecting things. In this game, you are collecting discs with animals on them. And I'm sure that collection aspect really appeals to them. I think the other thing they like is that they have more discs than everyone else, if they have. Yeah, they enjoy the fact that actually they've collected more discs than their friends. And they genuinely gain self-esteem from the fact that they've got more discs than their friends have. And then in the next game, they might have less, but somebody else has gained that self-esteem from the fact that they've collected and they've made better judgments on which disc to pull out of the bag. So that's what I think they like about it. And you can see when they get a duplicate. I don't know how well you know the game, but
I don't know it at all, I'm afraid.
But the idea is you're picking animals out of a bag, and if you get a duplicate, it's a push your luck type game. If you get a duplicate animal, then you have to put all the discs back in the bag. So you can see that their hopes are raised as they're gathering this very large number of discs, and they're thinking, right, shall I keep going and take another disc out or whatever? And when they pick a duplicate at that point, you can see they sink down to the fact that they've lost all of those discs, have to go back in the bag. But the tension of whether they're going to pick another animal which they haven't already got in front of them, that's really that's something that they enjoy, that whole tension aspect of it. Yeah.
And it's interesting when I see you post pictures on social media of the kids playing games. It's not just lightweight games like this. The kids seem to be playing games of all kinds of weight. Do you think the kids there are receptive to pretty much anything you put down in front of them?
Mostly. I think we have, at our centre, we have new children coming on a regular basis and who've never played any games before. This is in Kampala. And those ones need to play the simplest games. And Tiki Monkeys are obviously very, very quick to teach. But there are others who have been with us now for 3, 4, 5 or more years that they want to be trying the most complex games that are out. They enjoy the mental aspect of learning a complicated game. And we were playing one of the What's Your Game games recently, Madeira. And you could see that this one, I mean, I read through the rules, and I could see this one was going to be a bit of a challenge, but you could see them really enjoying the whole challenge of learning these quite complex rules and remembering what all of these different things on the board did. Because in order to get your optimal strategy, you need to make your decisions correctly in Madeira. So yeah, that, and obviously everything in between. There are quite a lot of children who've got like 1 or 2 years experience, and all those games in the middle, of which there are very many. They also, they're also looking at the kind of games which they enjoy playing. You know, we played memory games, we played the deduction games like Salem recently. So and the whole variety. We like to try to get as many different types of games available for people to try out. But some they really enjoy, but there are others which they don't like or they find really very difficult, and that's generally the ones which have got a lot of English on cards. Yeah, English on cards. That is the main problem, which makes the game too difficult. And or restricts it for us. Even really complicated games like Mombasa, because it's got no English on the cards, it's been quite easy for us to teach that game to a very large number of people. But the games with the English on the cards, that one is a problem for them. They don't have the same English comprehension as we might have, and therefore it becomes less accessible to them.
So I want to talk about the future of the Butterfly project, and especially with relation to gaming. So what's happening in the future for the project? Do you see yourself expanding, staying the same size?
Well, we hope to be able to expand at least a little bit more. We've decided that our program is going to be a 6-year program now, which is running throughout secondary school for each of our members, and then after 6 years they will graduate from our core social entrepreneurship training project. So that would mean that we would have 6 groups at any one time, and we would recruit a new group every year. This year we have recruited a group of 14, but this time we have focused very much on the board game clubs that we've got spread out across northern Uganda, and we've invited all of those who are part of the clubs who were in the right year of school, the last year of primary, to come and be interviewed and thereafter be tested on their abilities to see if they and we've now got these 14 that have been selected from probably 150 or so that we've now selected for our project this year, which will be the 5th group that we have. So we've graduated the first group and the second group now. We have the third group is now in year 5, the fourth group is now in year 3, and the 5th group will be in their first year starting in February. So that's our expansion. But my hope is that we could have 6 concurrent groups at any one time. We have some land up in the north, which is about 2.5 acres, and we've been building our children's activity centre. We want to turn this into a secondary school so that all of our members can go to that secondary school, have access to board games and all of the other different activities, and have their training on site there on an ongoing basis. But at the moment, the school is about 20% complete. So we do hope to finish that school during 2019, if at all possible. And then that would mean the 6th cohort could start, and we would then move all of our other cohorts to be schooling at our new secondary school.
What can we as gamers, publishers, and the gaming industry in general do to help?
Well, the biggest burden from our perspective, at least at the moment, and even when we have the school, is sponsorship of students. It's really very challenging for us, because we're a small project, to find sponsors for our members. We have in this latest cohort at least 12 out of the 14 who are board gamers and have got experience in board games. So I was hoping that maybe people around the world who are also enthusiastic about board games might be prepared to sponsor these new members that we've got. And we are starting to get a few sponsors coming in for them.
And what sort of cost are we looking at if someone were to sponsor a kid?
The school cost is £30 per month. And obviously over the year, that's £360 a year to sponsor them through school. So that's the figure that we are looking for.
So your final game is a classic, and this is Agricola. Why are you taking this with you?
Okay, well, this game, it sort of fits my bill of let's play a game which is different every time you play. Careers can be like that too, but Agricola requires more strategy, and that's the bit, I guess, that I enjoy the most. Agricola is a very bad game for Uganda because it has lots of English on the cards, so we've not played very much of it there. But I think for the most experienced ones, it would be fine. But yeah, this is what I like about it. It means you can play it again, and it's nothing like the game you played before. Plus, you can say, well, even if I've got those cards at the start, I can still go for a strategy which is going for vegetables, or I'm still going for a strategy that is focusing on getting lots of food, or whatever. You can make your own decisions at the beginning. But those cards will influence you and your decision making, and it will make sure that your game will be different this time. There are so many cards, you're hardly ever going to, well, probably never ever going to have the same set of cards at the beginning of the game. So yeah, I also toyed with Terraforming Mars because it has some similar aspects to it. But I felt that Agricola, if you got a set of cards at the beginning, then it's up to you to make what you can do with those particular cards, and you don't even have to use them if you don't want to. With Terraforming Mars, sometimes you'll get cards which are just not very compatible with your corporation. So that I like that game too, but that's where Agricola got the edge for me, is that actually even if you get dealt poor cards with that game at the start, you can still make and have a chance at winning it. So yeah, that it's really, I can imagine as after Doomsday, Agricola would get very many hundreds of plays, whereas some other games you might say, well, it can probably bear 20 or 30 plays, but not more than that. Whereas Agricola, I can see, could be playing for very many years to come.
So you're fleeing Kampala in Doomsday. You're going to the cabin, and you drive down the road, and you go around the corner. The back door of the car flies open. 4 of the games fly out down a ravine into a river and are swept away forever. Which game do you hope is sitting on the back seat of the car?
Okay, of those 5, I think I would say that I would hope that Folklore: The Affliction is the one that stays there on the back seat of the car, and because it covers so many bases. It's the imaginative side of things. It's the fantasy side. And the triumph over good, with good over evil. Yeah. So yeah, it's that's the one I think I would like.
Great. So how do people contact you? And more importantly, where can people go to donate money and help your project carry on?
Probably the best place to go is cyen.org.uk, cyen.org.uk. You'll be able to see the 14 new children that are recruited for this year, and obviously they can be sponsored through that particular website. If you want to contact us on Facebook, then facebook.com/Chrysalis Center. That is our website on Facebook. Or you can write to me directly if you would like on SOC, S-O-C, ENT, Africa @gmail.com. And I can point you to the right place and give you good links if you write to me. I'm usually very quick at responding.
Fabulous. Well, Ben Parkinson, thank you very much.
And yeah, I'd like to thank all of those also that have helped us achieve all of the different things that we have been able to do, and those that have donated to our crowdfunders and who are currently sponsoring students at the moment on our project. Thank you very much. And thanks very much for inviting me to this very special podcast.
And if you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on @5gamesfordoomsday on Twitter, or you can send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. You can give a rolling donation to help support the show at patreon.com/5G4D, or a one-time PayPal donation at the bottom of the website 5gamesfordoomsday.com. And if I haven't had to fire up my methane-powered jalopy to get away from the were armadillos and the lamentable decisions, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.